As the founder of EndUserSharepoint.com, our next speaker is internationally recognized as the voice of the SharePoint end user. A frequent speaker at SharePoint events, he is also an exemplar of community, constantly interacting with SharePoint users around the globe via social media, both inside and outside the SharePoint environment. Here to share some of his thoughts on the state of social SharePoint, please welcome Mark Miller.
Not yet, he's working on that. Hi, thank you for the introduction there. I hadn't heard that one before. That was nice. I have a tendency to wander a bit because I think better when I'm moving. Have you found that that you do that too? So I wander around a little bit as we're going here. No, nothing on the clicker? So you're going to, as I go like this, and he's going to advance it forward. I'm not a big proponent of social in SharePoint. And so when John and Chris called me and said, would you do this talk on social? I said, I'd love to. Because I think one of the decisions that we have to make as a business is what's the business rationale for putting social in the enterprise, much less within SharePoint. So I want to look at some of those and see what's going to happen here. Oh, it moved forward. Good. Good. So how unsocial is SharePoint? And I'm going to take it from the aspect as the end user of somebody that's actually going to use this to help them in their day-to-day work, to get them going, to do their job better, to get access to the information that they need. Thanks. As I said, Mark Miller, if you're on Twitter, how many people are on Twitter, by the way, as we're talking about social? Well, that's nice. That's nice. As I've traveled around the world, it seems that the farther we get from the core of activity, the less that Twitter happens. One of the problems with social, right? If we're thinking about, in general, social across the board. My official title is Senior Storyteller because I couldn't figure out anything else that describes what I really do. I travel around the world and I tell stories. I try to tell user stories to get people engaged in the technology. I don't speak geek. You're not going to hear me talking about web parts or going into the GAC. I don't even know what the GAC is. It sounds like a sick cat to me. I don't even know what it is. Talk to Dan Holm back there if you want to talk about the GAC. So, next, please. As you said, end user SharePoint is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, online community in the world. So what I'm going to present to you in the next 25 minutes is basically things that I've learned, things that I've pushed up against as far as social is concerned. It is now part of nothing but SharePoint. I expanded the umbrella from going from just end users. There's actually now social channels for IT Pro and for developer on the site because I found that things were starting to mesh and I wanted to make sure that everything was in one place, that people were talking about SharePoint could get to it in the same location. Next. And then finally I started a new company a couple months ago called Nothing But Branding that is still around SharePoint. The idea that in order to get people to use SharePoint, in order to get to use social even, you have to make the environment intuitive enough and friendly enough that people want to use it. Have you run up against that yet? If you've opened SharePoint, you know what I'm talking about, right? So that's the reason for that company. I do travel around. This is some of the locations I've been in the past year. I have traveled with John Anderson from Bamboo quite a bit. If you don't know John, he's up here. He's one of your hosts for the day. The last one that we did, we just got back from Africa. And what we were doing is we were building communities in Africa, and this was in Nairobi, where people in Nairobi did not even know that there was this many people available and interested in SharePoint. So John and I and the Sharing the Point team showed up and introduced the Nairobi people to themselves. And we literally, this room that you're looking at here was packed. There was also this many people outside the room. That the purpose of us traveling on Sharing the Point is to help build communities and show people how to use social media online to connect and then meet in the real world. That's what we're talking about, right? Is the real world. So what does social mean? I think that's where we need to start. Let's get a definition of social so that we're all on the same page. When I say social, what do you mean? I mean, we're small enough here. You can talk out loud. What does social mean? Getting together, right? Anybody else? Sharing, getting together. Communicating, good, all the right stuff, right? Intuitively, we know what social is. So I went to the dictionary, that source of unarguable definitions, the freedictionary.com site. But the idea that we have here is there's an interaction of people in forming groups. There's some kind of interaction. And so the online world has tried to take that terminology and own it. To become social is to be able to form groups and communities online. So I wanted to define that out as not only are we talking about social, but as you really look at it, what people just said in here is you're actually building relationships. As we're talking about this, we're here to talk about SharePoint. Can SharePoint help you do this? That's my bottom line question as a business user. If relationships are valuable in my business, and SharePoint says it's social, is it going to help me do this? Are we in agreement here? Can we move in that direction? Because that's where I'm going to take this thing. This is a diagram from Michael Wu from Lithium Technologies. Michael is a friend of mine, and he's one of the premier scientific analytic people in the world when it comes to finding out how communities work and how social works. And what Michael says is when you're building a community, you don't have a large group of people that are all interested in this same topic at the same time. What you have is small niche groups that will form within a single community, maybe even just 2 or 3 people. And they develop that relationship and that social understanding around the specific topics that they're interested in. I love this diagram, by the way. I hope you can see it clear enough on here. It's because you can get the idea that there's a core idea somewhere and that people start forming around that idea. Now, the real thing that happens, and this is actually proven through end-user SharePoint, is the niche groups start to interconnect with other groups. So a network of interconnected relationships. Take those small niche groups and find a way to start connecting those through interest, through people, through relationships, and then you start getting this. This is the crosstalk between people within a larger community. And that's when you start to grow the real social aspect of it. Now, what Michael has done is he takes humongous communities and actually does hardcore scientific analytics against it that I can't even understand. But that type of analytics isn't of my interest. My interest is, can we use this type of knowledge in order to get better use of the work environment, get better access to our information, and get better access to our data. Let's step back just a step on this so we can get the terminology right so we know what we're talking about. I don't think that data is information. Joe, you kind of went, agree, disagree?
What do you mean? Data's numbers. I mean, it's the understanding of that data that creates information.
Good. Data is just numbers and stuff that you're storing somewhere. But in order to make use of that, make use of the numbers, make use of the statistics and things like that, you have to draw it out and you turn the data into information. That's the way I look at it. So is there anything that we're looking at here from a social aspect that's going to help me turn my data into usable information so that my business can do its job better? And you're going to hear me talk about that over and over. If you know, you guys know Dux Raymond Sy, have you heard of him before? If you haven't, put him on your radar. Because Dux and I are talking the same ball game. We have to make a business case for everything that we do. Because in the end, if we don't have a business case, if we don't have usability in mind and how to get to the information that's usable within the company, then we're throwing away money and resources on things that people aren't using. So What is social online? Help me out here right now without even looking at the next slides. What is social online? Name a social platform online. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. There's one more on the way up. Microsoft just bought it for $1 billion. Yammer. How many people are using Yammer? Thank you, all 2 of you. If you're not, by the way, Joel Olison, have you heard of Joel? Do you know Joel Olison? Joel Olison has started a Yammer community. You might want to jump on that just to check it out. Just go to yammer.com and type in SPYAM. Okay. So, what is Facebook for? Honestly, we talked about the 4 we're going to talk about. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Yammer. What is Facebook for? What do you use it for, honestly? Anybody? Network of friends. Good, thanks. Yeah. So, I'm going to back up. So if social is Facebook, if Facebook has almost 1 billion users, and it's to connect and keep current with what's going on with your friends, is there a business case for Facebook in the enterprise? My answer is no. You said yes. Well, let's go.
I'm not talking Facebook
Okay.
for the enterprise. I'm talking about something like Facebook within the enterprise, keeping up with your colleagues and what they're doing.
Thanks. I think that's different, though.
Facebook specifically is advertising your company to people within your friends within your employees network.
That's one of the purposes. That's why they set up fan pages, right? So you can build it.
It depends how you use it. I mean,
Okay.
it's just a tool, so it's really not that different from LinkedIn. It's just the community you set up. I mean,
All right.
so, I mean, I prefer to keep them segregated, but you could use the same tool. The tool is sort of independent.
Good. So it's context, right? Most people in context are using Facebook to manage real friends, real world friends. LinkedIn, what we're finding, is actually used to manage business connections. So you're getting some kind of context there. So is there more of a value in LinkedIn in that context than there is for Facebook in the enterprise? It's a real world question. You say yes because of the context we built up here, but according to what he just said, what's your name? Steve. Well, according to what Steve just said, is Facebook basically does the same thing. It's just the context which divides business from your own personal community. I'd have to agree with that. That right now, the way that we perceive these networks, LinkedIn is more valuable to the enterprise. How many people are on LinkedIn? Good. Keep your hand up if you really use it to talk back and forth to people. Okay? It just went down by about 75%. Right? Sadie, good to see you. That speaks to the value of it, right? A lot of times, and I'm a social media guy, it's what I do for a living. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Yammer all day long. All 4 screens are open all day long. Okay? But that's what I do. I don't expect a typical work environment to have it. That's what I do for a living. But when I log in to LinkedIn in the morning, I look and it says, Joe Bob has been connected to Jim Bob. And Jim Bob has been connected to Sarah Bob. You know, just, I don't care. And that's the problem that we're having with these social networks is they're so broad and they're so generic. How are you going to filter that down to get to something that means something to you? And if you can think of that in the enterprise way, how are you going to refine the social aspects of SharePoint so that you can filter and get down to the information that you need when you need it? That's the Holy Grail. On a side note, I think personally that search and the display of search is the Holy Grail. Whether it's with social or whether it's with data pulling in information, things like that. I think search is the Holy Grail. That's a whole different discussion. Next, please. Twitter. How many people are on Twitter? I had you raise your hand. EUSP, if you're not following me yet. About 1.5 to 2 years ago, Twitter and the SharePoint community, in order to participate in the SharePoint community, you really had to be on Twitter. I know that might sound weird to those of you that aren't, because you think it's me telling you what I'm going to have for lunch today, which, by the way, I don't know, John. But what we found is most of the major proponents on Twitter, SharePoint proponents, are on Twitter. And if you need something answered immediately, this was the place to go. Say to you and I have done that quite a bit when you got something really quick that we both need. I mean, the idea there is that you have direct access to the most current information on SharePoint because everybody that's working in SharePoint at the high community level is on it. That was the value of Twitter. And when we realized it, the whole community jumped in the pool and started using it. That has now morphed over. Next. Thanks. So what we have now is Yammer. And if you're not, like I said, not many people are on Yammer yet, but most of the major players in SharePoint are on Joel's Yammer site right now. If you have a question that you have to have, I'll give you a real world example here. I see Barry in the back. Barry, hey, good to see you here. Caligo worked with us to do the Sharing the Point tour to get us to Africa last month. And one of the things that we did is we set up a private channel within Yammer here so that those of us on the tour and those of us at Caligo could actually exchange information back and forth on a private channel. It was indispensable to help us manage this. You know, realize we had 6 people that were going on tour in Africa. We had 6 different stops, and we had to coordinate everything around this. Could we have done it in email? You guys know where that leads, right? There isn't an email basket large enough to hold something like that. So Yammer turned out indispensable because it could thread the conversations. We could have private areas there. You could have private areas within private areas. This is actually not just supplementing what we used to see in SharePoint. It's actually replacing a lot of the conversation because you can have a real conversation, which in Twitter you couldn't because you had to limit it to 140 characters. So Twitter is still useful for some things, but Yammer is starting to supplement that. Microsoft saw that, put the money on the table and said, we're going to buy this and we're going to integrate it into SharePoint. I personally think it's a good move in one sense, but then we have to talk about the business case again. Next one, please. Is SharePoint social? Like I said, when John called me, I said, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So let's see what we have. Go ahead and see what we got. So when we have SharePoint 2010, there's some basic things in here. And I have to laugh because have you ever tried to use a discussion board in SharePoint? See, you're laughing too. And John and I were talking about that this morning too. That's why Bamboo created one of their web parts for it. It's why Lightning Tool, why there's a whole industry built around making better discussion boards, right? Microsoft has built this platform, and they built it so large and so ubiquitous that some of the components aren't ready for prime time and third parties have to come in and get them to work properly. I mean, that's the ball game. That's okay. They own this development platform. And now we have to go and look and see, is it applicable for social? Do we consider this social? When I look at this and I say, is it Facebook-like? Is it Twitter-like? Is it LinkedIn-like? Is it Yammer-like? I'd have to say no. So when I'm thinking about social in 2010, I'm thinking it might be the start. And Amanda, you and I had a talk a little this morning too about tagging, this folksonomy thing. Everybody, have you heard the word folksonomy before? Yeah. So that started to be part of it. But did it really make the platform social? And I have to keep coming back and saying, no, I don't think so. I don't see SharePoint as a social platform in 2010. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but the question's really not, is it social, it's, is it usable?
That's where I was going. Yes, thanks. Yes. Thanks for bringing me back on track. What do you use SharePoint for? And that's where this whole thing is going. The underlying theme is, what is SharePoint for? Help me out. Why are you using SharePoint, other than it was mandated in the company and you had to?
Storing information and documents.
Storing information and documents. Sharing documents. Anybody want to raise their hand on documents? Thank you. Art, please. Knowledge management. Project management, good. So you can help manage tasks and projects. Anybody else?
Spreading corporate communications.
Spreading corporate communications, good.
Task management.
Task management. I'm not hearing social in there anywhere. And I think that's the real problem here, is you can use the word social all you want to, but until you provide some kind of business use and business case, it's not going to happen yet. So, in 2013, this is what we're hearing. How many people going to SPC next month? Good. All right. I'll see you there. So Microsoft is trying to up the bar here and say, okay, we're going to design the next version around social. The assumption is that the design team at Microsoft knows what social is and how it can be. No, I'm not being facetious here. Much. But they know what social is and how it would be used in your enterprise. And I'm going to argue the case within the next 5 minutes that there is a case that social does not belong in the enterprise. Okay? So I'm looking at this, and there's a couple things. Like, they're building community sites. You know how everything was a default team site for the last 7 years? So they've got a template for a community site. And once again, I won't even bring up the Fabulous 40 and how well those worked in 2000. I guess I just did. But again, and this isn't a knock on Microsoft. I mean, they're trying to provide a foundation in which you can build the tools that you need to run your company. But if you're saying, I'm going to provide you with a community site, the basic assumption is they're defining community the way that you need it in order to run your business. So it's going to be tough. We're going to look at that, and there's going to be a shakeout, and there's going to be another third-party vendor set coming in that's actually going to redo the community site so it's usable for specific verticals. I'm going to be on that bandwagon. The other thing that we've got is, by design, there's news feeds and social search. Social search. Idea is great. The idea is great. Social search means that the basic enterprise knows who everybody is, where they are, what their expertise is, everything that they've ever worked on. That's social search, that you can get it. The dilemma that we saw in 2007 and 2010 is that once you went and set up your profile, and answer this for yourself, if you had My Sites turned on in the first place. Once you set up that profile, when's the last time you went and updated it? Literally. I talked to Joe about it this morning. He says, well, we mandated that the home page is My Sites, or something along that line, right? So if you're going to force something on somebody, okay, well, that's the way we have to live with it. But in actuality, we were finding across the board that people would set up their profiles in My Sites once and then walk away from it, because that's not the work environment that you work in on a daily basis. Good. Next one. So, should SharePoint be social? It's a make or break. What's the business case here? And that's the real question. And I want some feedback on this. Based upon the discussion we've had in the last 20 minutes, do you think that social belongs inside SharePoint? Sadie, I'm going to pick on you because you and I, we work so much together. Does social belong in SharePoint? Mhm.
but that it enables other processes. So it's going to enable collaboration, it's going to enable task management, it potentially can enable documents and how they're managed, right? So it's going to enable all those other things. It's like a layer.
Okay, good. Barry, as an owner of a company that's SharePoint specific, is social belong inside SharePoint?
When you say belong inside SharePoint, I think of SharePoint as a platform, not as an application.
Mm-hmm.
So should the platform have social capability to connect people and information and metadata, allow you to search, do all those things that social is about? Absolutely.
So as,
Be a social application.
thank you.
So
Okay, so as the owner of a company, and I'll put you on the spot here, do you think that people should have the ability to Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, the enterprise inside of the platform itself? Is that part, would that help your daily work?
well, social needs to be everywhere in the enterprise, right?
Okay.
To connect documents and people and information. And the platform needs to support that sort of interaction. So, yeah, I mean, in that sense, I think you need to have, I don't know if you say Yammer or Facebook, when you say social, I don't really think Yammer and Facebook and that sort of thing. In an enterprise context, I think about it as enabling people to do their work more quickly, be more productive, and connect them together with information. In the enterprise, it's about getting work done. It's not necessarily, the end result is work, not social interaction.
Thanks. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Barry just made the case for social inside the enterprise. And there's a big proponent of people that would not agree with that. I mean, we won't discuss it here, but that's the business case right there from the man that has to pay for it. And that's essentially what's going to happen. It has to float up to the checkbook and say, is there business value here if we implement this? You had something else, Steve?
Oh, well, I was thinking about two things. One is that there's information that needs to be within the firewall. And so the social you do inside the firewall will be different than outside the firewall.
Absolutely.
And so it's nice to have that. But the other thing I'm thinking about is why Google works and our search doesn't. And the reason is because you have a large community outside, and you said that there's very specific interests. In many companies, you're not going to have enough people inside your organization to get good answers.
Right.
So, you know, in some sense, it may not work too well, and you know, it'll be good for point solutions that are specific to your market. But then a lot of stuff you may want to do in a larger environment.
Great. I had a nice point. I had breakfast with Alyana from Pingar last week. They're doing massive findability research and building tools against that. And one of the things that she said in answer to that question there when I was talking about, she said, what we're doing now is it's linked data. The enterprise will actually have a core set of data. And what it's going to do is it's going to refine itself, and then it's going to link out to external sources and bring that into the data set from the external sources. So that's on the way. Good. Thanks. So I had to find a way to get an Africa shot in here so you can see I actually went. But communities can be small. There's 4 of us right there walking up to Kilimanjaro. A community, a social, all the things that we talked about, they don't have to be huge in order to be useful. But from the perspective of an owner of a business, from a perspective that's trying to help people get their work done, instead of jumping full force into social, decide what the business case is, decide how it would be used within the business to make work processes better and to justify itself before you jump in full force. There's going to be a lot of chatter. There's going to be a lot of talk at SPC 12 about the social aspects of 2013. But as you hear all of it, filter it through the lens of, will this help my business? And that's what will help you make the decision. So thank you. I hope that got you thinking a little bit. By the way, there's Kilimanjaro at sunrise when we were up there. I hope that gets you talking, not just here amongst yourself, but when you go back and say, okay, when people start using that word and throwing it out to your social, we've got a ground now to work from and see if it's more usable for you. All right. Thank you, John, for the invite. I hope you got something from that, and I'll see you here for the rest of the day. Thank you.